Right, members, it's 7:15, so I think we will make a start. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to members of the committee, members of the public who are here, and also to anybody watching via the Council's YouTube channel. The meeting is being webcast and audio recorded. I have apologies for absence from Councillors Abbott, Finken, Parker and Ritchie. Councillor Martin, I'm not sure whether she will be here, but those are the 4 apologies I've actually received. Item 2, declarations of interest. Could I have any declarations of either disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda? Councillor Cunningham.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Can I declare a non-pecuniary interest in the item relating to Rivenhall as Essex County Councillor and current portfolio holder for planning a growing economy? Several of the planning functions do come under my remit at Essex County Council. However, matters relating to NSIPs sit with the leader of the council. So having taken advice from the monitoring officer at Essex County Council and the deputy monitoring officer here at Grange District Council, I will stay in the meeting and participate in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Bowes-Flint.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to declare an interest in the same item. I am on the DNR Committee, Development and Regulation Committee at County, and I actually chaired the last meeting as well when an item relating to this site was discussed. And I think it's best for transparency that I actually do not take part, and I leave the room on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowes-Flint. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I also have an NPI in relation to the item on the incinerator, having campaigned against it, so I feel that I should leave the room during the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. For transparency, Councillor Butland, you go next.
Yes, an MPI on item 6, Wethersfield Conservation Area, only in as far as I have been present at parish council meetings where this has been discussed, but I intend to stay and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Butland. For transparency, I'm going to declare an NPI on item 5, the Rivenhall item, and because I am the BDC member representative on the site liaison group, but I will remain in the chair. Councillor Coleridge, are you? No? Right, fine. I think that's everybody. Okay, thank you, members. Item 3, minutes of previous meeting. The minutes for the 3rd of August are not available this evening, so we will deal with those at the next meeting. Public question time. We have 3 speakers this evening, 1 on the Rivenhall item and 2 for Wethersfield. The first person speaking is Councillor Thorogood, who's going to speak on Rivenhall and is speaking in his capacity as the chairman of the Rivenhall liaison group. Councillor Thorogood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just for transparent, I'm also obviously the Kelvedon and Fearing District Councillor, and the site is partially in the Fearing and Kelvedon ward. Thank you. Indeva, the Belgian company currently building a giant waste incinerator at Rivenhall Airfield, has applied via a DCO application to increase the electricity output of the site from 49.9 megawatts per year to over 50 megawatts without, it claims, having to increase the amount of waste it currently has permission to incinerate, currently 595,000 tonnes per year. On the face of it, this seems like a good thing. More electricity without burning more waste than permitted. What's not to like? But however, if Endeavour's application is granted, the site will become a nationally significant infrastructure project, or INSIP. As you know, INSIPs are major infrastructure developments in England and Wales that bypass normal local planning requirements. Although BDC is only a consultee in regards to the waste incinerator, Essex County Council is the waste planning authority and is currently responsible for examining new applications for this site. If Rivenhall becomes an INSIP, that tier of local government accountability will be taken away and the future of the site will lie solely in the hands of the Planning Inspectorate and the Secretary of State for Housing and Communities. Why should we care? Well, Indeva says it can increase the electricity output due to new technologies without increasing the amount of waste. Indra currently has permission to incinerate 595,000 tonnes. All of this is taken to the site by lorries, 200 in, 200 out per day, every day. They say they don't want to increase the amount of waste, just the amount of electricity. But Indra has permission to process 853,000 tonnes of waste on the site. The other 258,000 tonnes were due to be processed by a de-inking and paper pulping facility, an anaerobic digesting plant, a material recycling facility, and mechanical biological treatment facility. But on July the 28th this year, Indra successfully applied to Essex County Council to delete Condition 66, which meant it no longer has to build the other facilities. I understand, however, that the Secretary of State is now reviewing Essex County Council decision and a new environmental impact assessment may now be required. However, the Rivenall IWMF site is one of the worst examples of planning creep in the country. First, it was only meant to burn 350,000 tonnes, then in 2016 it was increased to 595. First, it was only meant to burn Essex waste, now it can take waste from anywhere, and first it was meant to be part of an IWMF, but now for all intents and purposes it's a standalone facility. Given the history of the site's planning creep, we need to make sure permission is not given to increase the amount of waste burned at the site. It always takes longer to read it. Always 595,000 tonnes would put it on the top 10 largest waste incinerators in the country. The additional capacity of the already permitted but unallocated 258,000 tonnes would make Rivenall the largest waste incinerator in the country after Runcorn, which burns 150,000 tonnes. Indra has said other new planning applications will be made for the site, but as yet we don't know what they will be. There is no certainty for the local communities in regards to what will eventually be built at the site. If Rivenall is made an INSIT, there will be less local accountability and we could end up with hundreds of thousands of tonnes more waste being incinerated on this site. I therefore ask BDC to object to this DTO application. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Thorogood, and I will ask officers to have some input when the when the item comes up on the agenda, and obviously members will have a chance to have their input as well. Thank you. Right, the next person to speak is Mr. John Pearce from High Street, Wethersfield, who is going to speak on agenda item 6, the Wethersfield Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan. Good evening, Mr. Pearce. Would you put your microphone on? That's it.
Good evening, members. I've been asked to represent Wethersfield Parish Council. The Council welcomes, in principle, an appraisal and management plan which identifies and addresses the need for positive measures aimed at preserving and enhancing the historic character and appearance of the conservation area. The revised camp is a considerable improvement on the initial version in 2019, following further information supplied to officers, and in particular, the Parish Council was pleased at the extent of unprecedented and unnecessary reductions in the area of the conservation area has been substantially reduced from around 2/3 being removed to around a quarter. The current 1973 designated and successful conservation area is coherent, easily understood and rational because it clearly defines and distinguishes the overall area of historical significance within the village from the surrounding arable farmland. Nevertheless, those areas proposed for removal are at least recognised as being important to the setting of the retained areas, making a positive contribution to the conservation area and enabling its significance and special interest to be appreciated. Despite the improvements made to the camp, the Parish Council asks that at the very least reconsideration is given to the removal of Area A and part of Area E on the plan of Figure 7 on page 44 of your agenda. These areas proposed for deletion not only provide an important setting that helps preserve historic character and interest to designated heritage assets, but also have qualities that amount to special interest. In particular, the justification on page 14 to remove Area A was that it, and I quote from the camp, "It is currently an agricultural field which it shares with many of the fields in the wider landscape." However, the revised camp retains the area to the west and north of Area A because, and I quote again, "the open area belonging to the manor was landscaped and the entry drive up to the manor was known to have run through this area with a gated entrance off the High Street to the east of St Mary Magdalene Church. Therefore, this area, with its historic special interest and its landscape character, can be easily distinguished from Area A. the cultivated land to the east. The boundary has therefore been redrawn to retain the open land with historic special interest in the form of the designed and landscaped approach to the manor, but excluding the agricultural field to the east. End of quote. In fact, Area A is not in arable cultivation and is and has been used for grazing precisely in the same way as the now retained area to the west and to the north of Area A referred to above. Area A is not distinguishable in use, historical role, ownership or parkland appearance from that retained area. The Manor Estate sale plans of 1895 showed Area A as a part of an area described as pleasure gardens and grounds, and this area retains that parkland character across the landscape between the playing field and the manor and should be encouraged for enhancement and not deletion. Moreover, the coach house and stable yard on the east side of the manor show the remains of a gateway post to the carriage drive which linked the manor to the high street. Those posts are on the boundary of Area A. For these reasons, Council again requests members to retain Area A in the conservation area. Therefore, the whole conservation area to the east of Braintree Road should be retained as currently designated.
Mr. Pearce, I say, you've had 3 minutes. I've let you go on a bit longer. Could you wrap up?
Oh, yes.
I'll give you a chance just to finish off. Thank you.
As to the west side of Braintree Road, the current western boundary is coherent and defines the overall spread of historic assets of the built-up part of the village, together with associated gardens, orchards and paddocks. In many instances, the revised boundary divides the curtilage of several historic buildings from their gardens. In connection with the boundary reductions, there is a need to recognise the proposed changes to the proposed boundary reductions in the text at pages 25, 46 and 42, which is written as if the changes were not made. Just final point, Madam Chair, the WPC is currently progressing a neighbourhood plan with Finchingfield, and heritage will be an important element of issues to be addressed. Any boundary changes ought to be considered as part of that exercise, together with a more thorough analysis of heritage issues facing the conservation area and the need for policies and implementation proposals such as telecoms, climate mitigation measures, highway enhancements and analysis of buildings in repairs. So the Parish Council hopes that members will consider these comments carefully before finalising the document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pearce. Thank you. The final speaker this evening is Mr. Mick Nash from Wethersfield, who's speaking on the same item, Wethersfield. Good evening, Mr. Nash.
Good evening. Thank you. I also consider the camp revision to be a substantial improvement on the initial version that was issued in 2019. There are, however, some unexplained adjustments that remain, and these are challenged, and there are some significant opportunities that are still being missed. Parish Council have given their representations on the Memorial Park, and I concur with these views and support the inclusion of Area A. However, there appears to be a small nib of land that connected with A that is proposed for deletion, and this there's no explanation given for this. It is in fact the pond and spring that connects to the parsonage farm as it is now. And the function of this and its importance to the community is very clear from historic maps. The pond was directly connected to the farm. It predates Wethersfield Place, Wethersfield Manor, and many of the listed buildings in the conservation area. And in fact, it's one of the oldest built forms identified on early maps outside of the main cluster. And its watercourse would have been important to the establishment of part of the parsonage at that site at the time, being a constant source of clear water. It's still to be found there. Water is still to be found there. It's slightly overgrown now, but it was included in the 70s because of that historical significance and should be included now. In fact, the whole of the cluster of Parsonage Farm, as an example of some of the shortcomings of the camp, is not explained in any way why Parsonage Farm is included in the conservation area. It happens to be one of the earliest built forms in the village, surrounded by open countryside and former glebe land, as it was identified on the 1777 Chapman and Andre map of Essex as a significant old asset. But none of this is explained in the W camp, and that needs to be done, and it needs to be done thoroughly. I also concur with the Parish Council's views on the inclusion of the sites on the west side of Braintree Road, where parts of the curtilage of heritage assets have been excluded. All of the curtilages of these heritage assets need to be included in the conservation area in order that enhancement can be further encouraged. Many of the measures in the management plan are welcome, they're being of good practice, but they lack analysis and they are generally, across the designated area, are generic in nature, consistent with district-wide planning policies and nationwide good practice, but they've not been developed specifically to address the measures that are specific to Wethersfield, which is what we need. Now, the joint neighbourhood plan for Finchley and Wethersfield has commenced, and because of that, heritage will be addressed in a much more thorough way as part of that process. And what we would like to see is that any adjustments to the area and indeed more thorough analysis of the conservation area and the heritage assets to be fully dealt with in the neighbourhood plan, and we should not tinker with the boundary at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, that's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Nash. Right. That finishes speakers for this evening, so we move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the Rivenhall Integrated Waste Management Facility consultation, and this is going to be presented by Alan.
Thank you very much. Bear with me. Why are you not there? Right, thank you. Indevar Rivenhall Limited are in the process of applying for what's known as a development consent order. This is to increase the proposed generating capacity at the Rivenhall Integrated Waste Management Facility, which is located at the former Rivenhall Airfield. A quick site map is available on the PowerPoint, so members can see where it is. Currently, the scheme has permission to generate just under 50 megawatts of electricity, but the development consent order they are looking for would increase that generating capacity to over 50 megawatts. The higher level of energy generation means that this proposal now falls within the definition of an NSIP, and therefore requires development consent, which is something that is determined not by local authorities, but by PINS and the Secretary of State. It should be noted that the majority of the scheme already has the benefit of planning permission as well. The scheme, should be noted, constitutes environmental impact assessment development, so it requires an environmental impact assessment. The subject of this consultation is the preliminary environmental impact report, and it sets out the early findings of the environmental impact assessment. It should be noted that the Planning Inspectorate has previously issued an EIA scoping opinion for these proposals, where they considered a wide range of environmental issues, but PINS have scoped out the majority of those issues, with the exception of climate change and greenhouse gases and noise. For climate change, the peer effects have been assessed for the operational phase only, as the other effects have been scoped out of the EIA. The residual effects are considered to be negligible, as there is no change to the original consented scheme. Whilst the document does state that there will be no increase in direct greenhouse gas emissions with the facility, it's considered this might be a little bit misleading, because it doesn't consider other types of emissions, which are often referred to as Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1 being direct emissions from a site, Scope 2 being emissions from suppliers, and Scope 3, which is the harder one to measure, is indirect emissions. But despite this, there is generally an overall positive in terms of the emissions. For noise, we have some concerns about the age of the baseline conditions noise survey, and also there needs to be reference within the document to planning practice guidance on noise, and it's also unclear how the facility will generate greater outputs and what the impacts of those greater outputs would be for the noise survey. And we're also unclear as to whether or not the noise survey is just a noise survey that was done for new noise receptors in Silver End, or that there's been a more general review. So, just to set out on the PowerPoint, what they are applying for is two options. They will, once they get their or once they hope to get their development consent order, they will then look at which option to pursue. So all of these options take place within the existing approved facility. So they are basically quite technical things, which, to be honest, I'm not an engineer, so I don't really understand them, to be honest. But there's things about changing to inlet control valves, which allows an increased steam generation of electricity. and that's sort of the general, very layman's overview of it. And with the technology they currently have permission for, that's obviously a few years old now, and since then there has been improvements in technology which would enable a greater generating capability. It's likely that that capability would be less than 65 megawatts. So to increase over 65 megawatts, they would probably have to actually start extending the building itself, which is something they've not indicated that they want to do. So we've got a response at Appendix 1, which looks primarily, mainly at climate change and noise. The consultation itself runs until 23rd of August. Yes, and I think if approved, they'll be looking at start on site for the DCO from about 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, one of the reasons we needed to have this additional meeting this evening is because our response to this quite technical point needs to go back by, 23rd, which is the day after tomorrow. So I will see if there's any comments from members. I have a couple of things I'd quite like to say, but would anybody like to comment at all? Councillor Butland.
Really, just to get clarification, Councillor Thorogood's main thrust was this becoming an NSIP, and therefore, as we've said on a number of occasions, that taking away local decision-making from local planning authorities. If I've heard Alan Masso right, what he's saying is that if it goes over 50 megawatts, it automatically becomes an NSIP. Presumably that is in statutory form, it's in a thing. So I'm just wondering, much though we might be in agreement with it, do we have any opportunity to influence that, whether it becomes an NSIP or not?
Okay. The 50 megawatt limit is set out in Section 15 of the Planning Act 2008. So there's a whole section that talks about other things such as power lines over a certain length, over generating capacity, and anything that falls within that is deemed to be a nationally significant infrastructure project. So we don't have any real influence on it because it's over 50 megawatts. Or 50 megawatts.
When you say we don't have a real influence, do we have any influence?
Sorry, no. No. As I say, it's set out in the Planning Act as to what constitutes an NSIP.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Thank you. I mean, my impression was that much as I agree, we might like to say we don't want this to happen, and then and that stops an NSIP in its tracks. That's not absolutely the case, and I think pretty much regardless of whatever we say this evening, it's going to be an NSIP anyway, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
well, it's heading that way.
It is, well, yes, it is an NSIP. It's been accepted by the Planning Inspectorate. I think it should, well, to put it frankly, it is going to be an NSIP. It's over a certain megawatt. This consultation isn't about whether or not it is or isn't an NSIP. It's looking at the generating our response to the environmental assessment in terms of climate and noise impact, rather than anything about the fundamentals of the proposal.
Yeah, it is quite a technical point. I mean, as an authority, we have objected to this right from the start. It has undergone a number of changes. Many of the, and I think as Councillor Thorogood pointed out, many of the at least potentially benefits from this, like the anaerobic digestion, paper pulping and so on, have fallen by the wayside. So we appear to have lost any of the good stuff, if I can put it that way. And our view, which we have already expressed, is that really we would appreciate an entirely fresh application because it bears very little resemblance now to the original application. But I think that's a fairly faint hope, quite frankly. So Indva are going to the Secretary of State ultimately for a decision once it's gone through the inspectorate process. I will say that I think if the members agree this evening to send this response, it's fairly robust. it's about as robust as we can make it. In that, on the climate change, in the letter that will go with my name on it as a portfolio holder, we are saying that whilst the documentation states there will be no increase in direct greenhouse gas emissions from the facility, this statement could be misleading, and then we go on to say why. And with regards to the point on noise, we are saying it's considered it is unclear how the facility will generate a greater output of electricity and what the impacts of that would be, and also unclear as to whether a new survey has been undertaken, or was it just for new noise receptors in Silver End, or was a more extensive survey undertaken? So I think we are pushing back with some questions, which, to be honest, members, is probably the most we can do. I know it's frustrating, but there we are. So, would anybody like to make any other points? If not, the recommendation, point 2.1, is to approve the response to the PEIR consultation as set out in Appendix 1 of this report. I would need somebody to move that, please. Councillor Butler, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Cunningham, thank you. Can I just have a show of hands on that, please? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you, Councillor Thorogood. I appreciate it's very frustrating, but we know that. I go to the liaison meetings as well, and we sympathise. Thank you. Right. Just wait for Councillors Walsh and Val-Smith to come back in.
Share screen.
Right. Thank you, members. We move on to item 6 on the agenda, the Wethersfield Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan, otherwise known as CAMP, which is probably appropriate. And this report is going to be presented by Julie. And we also, I omitted to say at the beginning, have Laura Johnson from Place Services with us again this evening, who I'm sure will be able to help with any questions. Thank you. Julie.
Thank you. This is one of a number of conservation area reviews which the Council has been undertaking in accordance with its duty under the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Area Act 1990. This Act requires local planning authorities to determine which part of their areas are of special architectural or historic interest, the character or appearance of which it is desirable to preserve or enhance. Having designated such areas as conservation areas, authorities have a duty to review these and determine if any of these areas should remain designated or additional parts to be added. Heritage consultants were tasked to produce a conservation area character assessment and management plan. This was publicised as set out in the report, and a public meeting was held as is required by the Act. Following consideration of the responses, a site meeting with parish representatives and submission of further materials, alterations were made to the document, and this revised document is what is before committee today. The 2023 document is intended to guide future development. It looks at the origin and evolution of the village, its archaeological potential, designated and non-designated heritage assets, such as listed buildings. It looks at traditional features and details, public realm, including landscaping and open space, and highlights some important views. It divides the conservation area into 3 character areas. First of all, the historic core to the north, that's the blue area. And then the Wethersfield Hall and Russell's Farm area, which is the part in the middle, and the Manor House locale. The original document, the 2019 document, had proposed some changes to the conservation area boundaries. The left-hand map shows the existing conservation area boundary in green. That's this area here. As you can see, the boundary includes a great deal of open space. The right-hand map shows the proposed boundary alterations from the 2019 document, which went to public consultation. And the yellow, as you can see, the yellow is the area that was originally proposed. And the hatched areas were the areas that were shown for removal. As you can see, the proposed boundary here aligned far more closely with the built-up form of the village and excluded larger areas that were considered not to have sufficient architectural or historic interest in of themselves to merit their inclusion within the conservation area. And you will remember that the Planning and Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act requires that conservation areas are made up of areas which have architectural or historic interests. The National Planning Policy Framework, and I will emphasise the last part of this, emphasises that the concept of conservation should not be devalued through the designation of areas that lack special interest. However, these areas which are not within the actual conservation area can be important as setting. And the National Planning Policy Framework glossary defines setting as surroundings in which a heritage asset is experienced, its extent is not fixed, it is not defined on a map or allocated, and it may change as the asset and its surroundings evolve. So elements of a setting can make a positive or a negative contribution and to the significance of the assets. And you know, for example, if a conservation area is next to a particularly ugly site, then you can see that its presence might harm the appreciation of the conservation area, and its removal could improve it. These two maps show the 2019 boundary alterations along with the boundary alterations that we're looking at tonight, just so that you can see them both side by side. Alterations were made to the appraisal document following, again, consideration of the responses and the further material received. And the left-hand map shows the 2019 document's proposed boundary. It was considered that the Parsonage Farm area merited retention, as did area south of the manor and along Braintree Road. Additional text was also included in the appraisal document to explain the importance of setting. Now, in response to the statements from members of the public, they have brought up several areas which they wish to be included. The first of these was Area A, and this identifies. I thought it might be useful for members to see the map and the aerial photograph together to assist consideration. The appraisal document identifies some history of agricultural use of Area A, although more recently used for grazing of horses in connection with the horticulture use on neighbouring land. There is a bank of trees and vegetation along here which separates this whole area from the former manor, which is on this site. The manor buildings have been subdivided into separate properties, and the sense of connection between these two, between the manor and this, has been somewhat degraded. And you can see that this lies beside similar land that is not used for agriculture, but which is not included even in the existing conservation area. The other area, Area E, which we've mentioned, is further to the south, and this area here consists of open land and paddocks and grazing and meadows, etc. The built fabric is closer to Braintree Road along here, and these areas have been included, have been recommended for retention. But the open land has been considered not to contain sufficient architectural or historic interest in of themselves to merit inclusion, but would be important as and valuable as setting. The third area is at Parsonage Farm, and it consists of a small area of ponds or former ponds surrounded by vegetation, and I think there are some trees there as well. This we viewed as more of, as having less, not sufficient historical interest to actually retain within the conservation area, with this feature being more of a landscape feature in its character. And that is the end of the presentation, members.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I think having looked at the slides and presentation, I can see the justification for removing Area A, that part of Area A, and I think I can see the reasons why E is removed. The Parsonage Farm cluster was one I think I had a question mark over. But let me see what comments might be from members, and I'll maybe ask Laura also to come in. Members, any comments first from anybody? Yes, Councillor Bowes-Flynn.
Madam Chairman, can I just clarify something with the officer, please? Because I think it was mentioned in one of the public statements, but there is where I'm looking. I'm looking at that plan, but on where it's got all of them in it, and it has got a little triangle up above A, which has got no letter on it, and there's been no mention of it in the officers.
That's the pond, I believe.
Oh right,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Walsh.
Primarily an information question, and I think I know the answer to this, but am I right in assuming that adopting this amended conservation area wouldn't have any effect on BDC commenting on the asylum centre at the Wethersfield Air Base, because it's quite a different area, or is otherwise not in any way connected?
I think that's a correct assumption. But Julie, you.
I would agree with that. They are unrelated.
Yeah. Councillor Butland.
In the representations during the public part, there was a suggestion that with the work which we've agreed, the joint Weathersfield, Finchingfield local neighbourhood plan, that there would be quite, I think it said there would be quite a bit of emphasis on heritage. Would it, I suppose from my point of view, what difference would it make if the two were taken together? Does it give particular problems? What would be the impact of saying, right, okay, if we're going to do this, and I know, as I said, from attendance at parish councils, there's a keen group of people who I think are going to spend a lot of time, and I'm pretty sure will do a pretty good job of it. What the impact would be of looking at the two things together, or is it a no-no for some reason?
The neighbourhood plan could not consider alterations to the conservation area boundaries. They are two separate processes, and in terms of certain other things that might occur within a conservation area, for example, Article 4s can be considered within a conservation area. There again, there is a separate process with their own procedure set out in the 1990 Act. I'm not too sure in terms of Article 4 whether it could only be done by local authority, or to what extent they could be delegated to the neighbourhood plan group. But that's something that we could certainly look at if it came up.
Given that, sorry, May.
Yep.
Given that, I think 1973 was when this was done.
Yeah.
So, it's nearly 50 years. Oh, 50 years, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a bit of chicken. I'm struggling with the chicken and egg bit of this. Would there be any benefit in getting the neighbourhood plan done first, and then us reviewing what we're being asked to review tonight, or is that also a no-no for whatever reason?
I think Alan. Yes, Alan.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as Julie touched on earlier, the conservation area process is separate to the neighbourhood plan process. It's not really a chicken and egg, because obviously there's two different species. I think they're completely different species. Neighbourhood plans can obviously set policies, they can allocate, they can do things like determine where development boundaries are. But if members recall, when we were doing the local plan, we didn't review every conservation area for the local plan, and we'd probably still be doing it if we did, because there's quite a lot of them. They are also, neighbourhood plans are adopted under a separate, they're Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, taking into consideration country planning regulations, which are also what neighbourhood plans are adopted under, whereas a conservation area is adopted under the Planning Listed Building Conservation Areas Act, so they're two separate processes entirely. They can occur separately with no difficulties whatsoever. If Weathersfield and Finchingfield, through their neighbourhood plans, generated enough evidence perhaps of their heritage, then maybe in a few years' time, when we get around to reviewing conservation areas again, we could look at that evidence potentially, because there are the opportunity to put in management policies and proposals into conservation area appraisals as well as local plans. There's other heritage things that neighbourhood plans can do other than set policy. I believe Hatfield Peveril have recently considering a heritage list as well, so there are things that they can potentially include for heritage within a neighbourhood plan. So there's stuff for them to do, but conservation areas are separate.
Can I come back in?
Yes. Yeah.
So if I've interpreted that right, if we were to agree something tonight, whatever that might be, with regard to this area, and then the neighbourhood plan is done, and there may be something out of that which may impact upon this, are you saying we wouldn't have to wait another 50 years before we reviewed this, that we would give an undertaking that we would look at it promptly if there was real conflict. Because I don't think 50 years, to be quite honest, is something that I think the people of Wethersfield would be looking for.
I think I could respond by saying if members are willing to give me the budget to review the conservation area again regularly, then yes. I mean, it has been a very long time, conservation areas. We do have a lot of them. We've got other conservation areas that haven't been looked at since their original designation in the 60s. So we are trying to get through the older ones as well as the conservation areas that have had development pressure. But if there's in a few years' time there's significant new evidence, then I mean we do review a little bit quicker when there is development pressure. So, for example, Housewood was reviewed, I think, in 2009 and is currently undergoing a re-review because of the amount of new development that's happened in that area. But we do have a very limited budget to do conservation areas, and we have to spend that wisely.
Thank you, Alec. Can I just go back to Parsonage Farm cluster? Is it possible to see where it is on one of the slides, please?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And what, sorry, forgive me, can I just have, again, an explanation of why that's not in? Laura, do you, I don't know if you want to.
So do you want me to explain
the
element
please,
about
that
the pond?
would be helpful.
Okay, so I think the way the boundary's been looked at this time around was primarily based off Ordnance Survey maps and looking at regularising everything to do with field boundaries. The pond in itself was taken out because we followed the line of the field boundary, and whilst that pond has got some historic interest perhaps of itself, it's more of a historic environment feature than something that has sort of spurned built form there. It's not like a mill chase kind of situation, it's almost incidental. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Okay, yeah, that helps. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, and I think can just say grateful thanks for this excellent piece of work that's been done, produced by officers, but also I think a special acknowledgement to the communities involved for their really positive engagement and the excellent contributions and thoughtful contributions we've had this evening. And of course we've also got additional members of the public from that community who've joined us this evening. So I was just a little bit concerned, Madam Chairman, because there was some comments going around on social media, not necessarily terribly informed comments, that somehow this was something that was thrown on the local community by the District Council. There hadn't been a two-way process of engagement. I think we've seen tonight that that's not the case at all. And I share, I think, Councillor Butland's slight discomfort about the sequencing of this. There's been obviously a very engaged community process, and there's going to be another very engaged community process that's going to be starting shortly, and it would be a shame if they weren't, dare I say, speaking to each other perhaps a little bit better than the process has allowed so far. And that's not a criticism, that's just a matter of criticism of the way the work's been done. It's just a matter of fact the way the outcomes we have at the evening. So can I just double check the assessment that once the community's put forward their neighbourhood plan, and if the council is minded to adopt it in its entirety, it would be quite possible to have another look at this piece of work within a very short space of time. Is that what's being suggested by officers this evening?
Yes, if we have the budget to do it.
Yes, yeah, that would be good. Yeah, I picked up on some comments about lack of consultation and so on, and actually I do know there has been a considerable consultation process with this, with every opportunity for input. Like the neighbourhood plans, these require a lot of work from officers and from the community, and I think it is very much appreciated, the input that we've had. Councillor Bowes-Flint.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Do I understand correctly that Wethersfield and Finchley neighbourhood plan has only just begun? So the time scale on that, I know you can't say for sure, but just a rough time scale, because we all know, even with the really dedicated people which there are in Wethersfield and Finchley who will put this together, it will take some time. Therefore, another reason why this should be done now, basically. And the other thing is, mention was made of Article 4 being put down to the neighbourhood plan, and I don't think that that is legally allowed. Thank you.
Yes, Julie?
Sorry, what I meant by the Article 4 was an example of another process involved when you're looking at heritage, but which cannot be done as part of the neighbourhood plan process. That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And yes, you're right, Councillor Balsrand, about the neighbourhood plan. It was only at a very recent meeting of Cabinet, I think it was, that we agreed that Wethersfield and Finchingfield could have a joint neighbourhood plan, so it is very early stages, and yet we know they take quite a while. So you're right. In the meantime, this does give, good protection. So quite important, I think, to get this in place. Officers, anybody? Any other comments from anyone? No? Oh, timescale on the neighbourhood plan.
I've been looking. Well, each neighbourhood plan is different. Last time I had a quick check through our sort of spreadsheets for all the other neighbourhood plans, we're looking at sort of between 18 months and 2 years to get Regulation 14 consultation out. But obviously each group is different depending how many volunteers they have, the resources they have available, the expertise, that sort of thing. So it could be quicker than that, but I'd say on average 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah, right, thank you. All right. Any other comments from anyone? No?
Sorry.
Oh, yes, Laura.
I just want to make a quick comment that the neighbourhood plan and the conservation area appraisal shouldn't prejudice each other at all. They're designed to go hand in hand.
Yeah, good. Thank you. That's helpful. Right, members. So the recommendations are point 2.1 that the Wethersfield Conservation Area Character Assessment and Management Plan be approved, and 2.2 that approval be delegated to the Corporate Director for Growth to make any minor wording changes to the Conservation Area Character Assessment and Management Plan. Could I have somebody to move, please?
Madam Chair, can I just make a slight
Yes.
amendment to
Yes,
that?
yeah.
And that this committee recommends to Cabinet that, I haven't got exact wording, but basically that early consideration of this should be done following the approval of the Wethersfield and Finchingfield neighbourhood plan.
Yeah.
I don't want that point lost.
Yes.
And if
Yes.
we could put that down, I think that would bring the, as far as we can do, bring the two together.
I've moved that, Madam Chair, with that addition.
Right. Officers, you've got that? Yep. Really comfortable with that? Good. Fine. Thank you, Councillor Balsrand. Can I have a seconder then, please? Councillor Cunningham. And show of hands, please. Those recommendations moved with that amendment. Thank you. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. And that is everything on the agenda for this evening. We have no urgent business either in public or private session. So I'll close the meeting at about 8:09. Thank you.